Howdy YouTube. Episode 14. Episode 14. We are doing the start of our SRD series. This is more of an introduction to sort of talk about it. In episode 11, we had a talk with Zone Fighter about doing about his SRD, and we thought, and so I was talking to Caradwin recently, and I said, hey, it would be pretty cool if we did our own SRD, and I had this idea for an SRD. I actually had this idea for a system, and then it was like, well, what if you just made it like the rule set and you split it off? And then so I said, yeah, what if we just made it into an SRD? And I'm not really fully aware of how SRDs work necessarily, but my understanding is an SRD is more just like a rule book. And you can take these rules, not rule book, but per se like a system, and then you could just sort of take this system and plug it into different things. And so that's sort of what, where this sort of came from, is that we'll do this SRD, and what we'll have is a link on the bottom of this video in which you could follow our SRD and what we want to do with this SRD. And so basically what I'm trying to develop here, because I had an idea and I was already talking to somebody about what I wanted to do, and there's going to be a lot of things to figure out. There's going to be a lot of changes to this thing, so you're going to be able to follow along with it if you want to. But basically, the SRD that we're creating is going to be based off of a basic dice pool system. So we're looking at a D6, D10, D12, D8, whatever it is, a pool of systems. You'll have stat blocks, or you'll have something that determines how many you're supposed to roll. So if you would say four dice plus 8 dice or whatever it is. And the idea behind it is that you would roll these previous to a scene starting. So these are pre-dice rolls, similar to our upcoming Star Fury system. So I'm very much into this mood of, like, what if we did pre-dice rolls? Like, what if you rolled before you had to do the scenes? What if you rolled and you could make the decisions based off of what you want to do as characters, and it feels more of a natural, like, extension of yourself, as opposed to, I want to do this. Okay, well, let's see if you succeed. Oh, I don't succeed. And I think that's fundamentally, like, the way we do things in TTRPG. Or you succeed, congratulations. And there's a very, like, flow stop that happens in gaming that really, like, if you're playing a game and you're fighting this boss, you have to, how many stops do we have to do? Do we ever consider how many stops we have to make in order for us to, like, play the game? Rules light systems have a tendency to try to, solve this by, like, making the system easier and making it more about narrative choices, which takes a lot of the meat out of the games. So that's my main basic issue with, like, okay, let's make this rules light. Let's make this, like, more of a easy to play, digestible game that can be picked up and go. Let's focus more on telling a story. Let's focus more on being narrative. And it kind of, like, is great if you're a GM and if you're just kind of wanting to tell a cool story. But as players, it lacks some of those nuances and depth that we get from playing more robust systems. Like, there's only so much you can create off of, like, a index card style RPG creation. And as much as I do thoroughly enjoy those type of game systems, that's what I see a lot. Is like, okay, you make this character and you base it off of 6 points of discussion, and then that's it. And so we want to create this. We want to be able to do we want to be able to be easy to handle, but we also want to be able to make it about, making decisions. So Star Fury focused primarily and entirely a lot on, in which most of you haven't seen Star Fury, but Star Fury, the one that we're sort of working on towards, is a dice roll system in which we pre-roll all the dice, and you have a board, and you sort of make combinations, and you decide how you want to base those combinations. it's very much based off of how you want to play the board and not based off of like, okay, I'm going to roll and see how things go. So there's a lot more like decision making around the player, but there's still a lot of like, well, you're only given what you have. So it's not this sort of free flow system where you can just be like, I'm going to do what I want to do and the rolls are easy. So it's either some mechanics, light character creation, lacks robustness, but a lot of like heavy mechanics and difficult and more robust games like slow things down. You have to roll. We have to get initiative rolls before the top of every like if we take Z&D for example, we had to re-roll the initiative roll at the top of every combat scenario. You roll for each of your individual actions. You roll if somebody if somebody does a spell cast. There is so many things that stop the flow of story. And then sometimes, like when you're in the middle of something, you don't want to roll to figure out whether or not you befriend the beast. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what we don't want to see. Like, a lot of people, or at least me particularly, I'm not going to say a lot of people, me personally, I just don't enjoy a game where I have to stop. And I have to, like, roll instantly, for, and I get it, we have to, this is the way TTRPGs are built, but I feel like there has to be a better way. So here's the SRD. I was actually recording this a little bit earlier, and I started having some sort of anxiety for some reason, so I had to stop, and so I recorded, and I had already had some stuff written down from the previous recording, so I'm just sort of, like, picking up. So the basics of this is that you're going to have a dice pool system, and what you're going to do is before scenes, depending on your goals and your expectations, you're going to be able to place these dice into boxes, and not every box should necessarily be unlocked in the game. I think you earn them through XP. I think there has to be an unlockable XP portion of this game. But each of these actions has a range of possibilities of good and bad. Like, I think there's failure points for each action. So, like, imagine that there's a dice. So, action, place dice, you roll. Action, place the dice, you roll. So, you have, that's what it says in my SRD file here. So, say I have a box, and the box says +1, to aid allies. Okay, so if you roll between, say we're going to use a D12 system here. Say 0 to 4, 1 to 4, or 1 to 5 is considered failure. So if you roll 5 and under, you're failing, and that says you get ally gets a -1. Ally gets a -1, but you get to ask a question to the GM about the enemy, or you find something out or something. So we're still needing to do fall forward mechanic in this, because it's intended to be that if you roll these failures, you need to have a reason to be able to still take a failure. So you don't have to use the dice. So these dice are based off of your decisions and what you think is most important to you as a player and a character. So you could just go the whole scene without using any of the dice you place in any of your action squares. But that's in essence what these action squares are supposed to be able to do. So 0 to 5 is, so 1 to 5 is going to tell you that you fail and your ally gets a -1 instead of a +1. Okay, so that's pretty terrible, but you get to ask a question about the enemy. So you can say, is the enemy weak against anything? Okay, the enemy is weak against fire. Okay, cool. Now we know that the enemy is weak against fire. And you learn this by screwing up. But that helps you in the scene. It could be something as simple as that. And then if you roll a 6 to 10, then you get a +1. Your ally gets a +1. And if you have an 11 to 12, 11 or 12, then you have a top success, and that's a +2 to your ally. Okay, so that's basic. So you roll, so you'll have a dice pool that'll be created at the beginning of each scene, and maybe there's a portion of the thing that's your dice pools are determined by difficulty of the scene. So the GM can set expectations, set expectations prior to the scene. And these could be like, okay, so it's going to be an easy scene. It's only going to give you like 3 extra dice. So your pool is going to be based off of like, you know, certain expectations. And I think we're going to have to do this is set scenes and setting scenes and do more scene setting or scene setting. So how well prepared are you in the scene? Well prepared, how hostility of the scene. The hostility of the scene, are you rested? Are you rested? I think there's going to be factorials that will determine dice rolls. So we're looking at factors to determine dice rolls. And then on top of that is going to be stat runs. And so you're going to be able to roll and place these extra dice onto any of these like pools. So maybe your physical actions are going to have a set of pools, your social actions, and your mental actions. And what you do is you place them once you roll. So you're going to roll this pool of like, say, 7 dice. And 1 die is going to be, I'm going to be able to shoot the enemy. Okay, so you're always going to be prepared in the scene that you're going to have a gun ready to shoot. All right, that makes a lot of sense. So maybe one of the actions is going to be I quick draw. I'm practicing. I'm ready for a quick draw. So my hand is on the holster. These could be narrative actions or actual action. So it could be hand on the holster, and that could just be the action will be that if you roll certain level of 1 to 4, it's bad and whatever. The point being is that the idea is you're allowed to expend these action boxes throughout the scene, and these put your focal points on each of these action points. So whether or not, so the question is going to be, there's going to be attributes. So imagine that there's 3 attributes you're going to be working on, which is going to be social, mental, and physical. And there's going to be a die level between 1 and, say, 10 for each one. The next thing that's going to be determined, and I need to decide this, is whether or not you have skills below that. So do you have like dice pools based off of athletics, or do you just have skill runs? So the question is going to be skills, because we have a traditionality about putting skills, but maybe we don't do skills, but we just put actions. And you'll get all of the physical actions and you check mark the things you want based off of how many dice you have. So if you decide that you're going to have an attribute score of 7, so maybe attribute score 7 will unlock 7 skills. 7 action. Attribute score 7 will get you 7 actions. And actions don't necessarily have to have just one box on it. It could have multiple boxes. So you could have a I will shoot you box of 4 dice. So you can do maybe a possibility of, or 5 dice. So you have 5 dice and you can, so 1 die is going to be a 4, 1 die is going to be a 7, 10. So maybe you're going to fail the first shot. You're going to fail one of the, not the first shot, maybe you just fail one of the shots. And that's the thing, is that like, so that's the, so the action can have multiple boxes per action. So this is important because we want to be able to say we have multiple boxes per action. Some actions may be only done once, like taking a leap of faith. Maybe you can only take a leap of faith 1 time. Or single, so multiple backshots per action or single. Attribute score 7, maybe 7 actions. Yeah, so that's the notion that the game that we're sort of looking to create over the next couple, like the SRD that we're looking to create over the next couple weeks. It's the idea that here are 3 possible stats. And I think these stats can change. I think they have to be physical, mental, and it could be these things are, the stats could be based on attributes, or stats could change based on characters, and we'll maybe need to look at doing playbooks. Or maybe look at playbooks. So you start with the basics of like, oh, you can start with you start with 5 physical, seven mental, and that gives you 7 actions to start. And that's the idea behind it. It's a very robust system, but the idea behind it is you're supposed to be able to like make quick choices, make quick actions. I would like to have guns ready, because this is going to be one of those scenes where I think I need to have guns ready. And maybe in a future scene where you're like, I'm going to go revisiting a family member or something like that, maybe we don't need to have guns ready. Maybe we just need to be ready to run. And maybe that's where the focal point will be for your character. Your character is preparing mentally for these things to be ready for the next scene. So you're not, so in a scene where you suddenly run into gunfire, maybe you're just not prepared for it. You just don't have the dice capacity to do those things. And that's what makes this game pretty interesting, is that it does create a sense of like mentality of where your character is, where your character is creating sort of the mentality for where your player's character creating the mentality for where your character is. And that fundamentally is what this SRD is going to try to create. It's going to try to create this moment where you just have to make fast decisions, and you may take the failure, you may not take the failure. Maybe you don't want to miss the bullet, but maybe you do want to miss the bullet because it does something, helps you. And maybe it helps an ally. Maybe it gives a +1 to an ally because somebody dodges the bullet. Or maybe it causes a distraction, and maybe that helps you out. And so it's intended to be that once you burn your dice, that's the end of it. Like, you could be out of stuff to do in the scene, and that makes it fundamentally more interesting. Like, maybe you have you can burn a will, so maybe there's a willpower that allows you to put a die back into the field. So like there could be things like energy or capacity. So like your body, or maybe if you may want to be able to, shoot a lot or do whatever it is, but maybe it's just too much for you in that single scene. And maybe scenes are just supposed to be short, so you're always going to be, we're not going to run into these 3-hour and 1-hour scenes, but we're just supposed to run into a scene that takes 10-20 minutes. And in that 10-20 minutes, so we're supposed to go through, and so we may have to fundamentally look at how we use time. Or we just use a lot of dice. It could be a D6, loads of dice, where you put like almost 30 dice on the table, and you're just being as prepared as you possibly can for all the possible actions. And maybe the one thing you didn't prepare for was, we need to jump over a wall. And maybe you're like, well, I'm going to have to get prepared for it. So you roll a die and you throw the willpower out, and then you just add the die into the jump. But you're like, but yeah, that's expending will, because these are things you just didn't expect. And the more things you don't expect, the worse it is for your character. I think that fundamentally makes the game far more interesting, is that you just don't know what's going to happen. So you just have to react and interact as best as you possibly could. So that's what this SRD is going to be about. And if you want to keep following along with it, there is a link below. You can just bookmark it, and you can take a look and see what we're doing and how we're working it. And there's a lot of questions that need to be answered about this dice pool system. I'm going to actually have to look at how SRDs are typically written. But I hope you are as excited for this SRD as we are, because we think it's a pretty cool thing to try to put together. Again, this is Gilbert with the Unnamed Game Company. If you like this podcast, please hit like and subscribe. We really appreciate it if you do. But yeah, again, signing off. See you on the next episode.